Welcome to the VB Toolbox. In this tutorial I will be teaching you how to fill a combo box with items from a database. In this tutorial I will be using SQL Ce, or a compact edition database, simply because it's lightweight, portable, and also comes as part of the Visual Studio or Visual Basic packages. So you should have those on your machine, and nice thing about it is you don't have to install a SQL server to use it. So this should work with any other types of databases that you wish to use, MySQL or Access or anything else that you can establish an ADO connection to, or any other kind of database connection. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing we will do is click to create a new project and give it a name. I'm just going to call it Combo Fill and hit OK. Make sure that's a Windows Forms application. And from here I want to add a couple of controls. The first being, of course, our combo box that we want to fill with database items. So I'm going to bring that up, and I'm going to shrink my error list down here, but maybe I can just hide that so we have a little more room to play. I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to be doing something simple, maybe just a list of foods or something like that. So I want to select my combo box and change the name of it to something that's a little easier to call on. I'm going to call it CBX Food. And so I'm going to have a list of foods. Next up, I want a text box. And in this text box, I'm going to display the type of food. Okay, so I'm just going to select that and change the name to txt food type. Okay, and so these are pretty much the only controls we'll be using for this tutorial. And what I'm going to teach you is how to add a database to your project and bring in records from that database into this combo box, and then requery the database based on the item that we select in the combo box. When we select it, it'll requery and bring up the type of food and put it over here in this text box. Kind of a cool trick. So next up, we want to create a reference to our SQL Ce database library. So this is how we're going to be able to get access to, our query features and whatnot. So if we come over to our Solution Explorer, right click and select Add Reference, and then go to the .NET references, and you can organize your component name by clicking that, and we want to find system.data.SQL Ce server. So go down to the S's, and there we are. So you should have this 3.51. This one comes with Visual Basic. I added this one later on. I did an upgrade, which you can get from Microsoft for free. But let's just go ahead and use 3.51. That's just fine. And select OK. So now we have a reference to that library, and we can begin creating our SQL Control class. So to create that class, let's right click on our solution header on our project and select Add Class. Okay, and we're going to give our class a name. I like to call mine SQL Control. Okay, you can call yours whatever you like. And since we added our reference, we can now import the system.data SQL Server Ce library. So I'm going to start with imports system.data, and then I'm going to import system.data.SQL Server Ce. That gives us access to all of our ADO features. And the first part of this we're going to need to create a SQL connection and then a SQL command, and of course our data adapter and data set. It's going to be hard to call on a database here without actually having a database in our project yet, so maybe we should jump over and actually add the database to our project. Let's right click on our Solution Explorer again on our project head and select Add, New Item, and come down to Installed Templates, Data, and you should have an option to add a local database. And if we click on that, we can see it's an empty SQL Server Compact 3.5 database. That's the reference that we added. So give your database file a name. I'm just going to call this one ComboFill.sdf and click Add. And now you should notice if this wizard pops up, you can use these, and probably a lot of people actually like to use the wizards. I just like to hand code it, so that's how we're going to learn how it's all working. I'm just going to cancel out of that, and now we will have the database file in our Solution Explorer. So with that in there, we can now create a SQL connection. So I'm just going to add a little note, SQL connection. And I'm going to create this as a private variable. I'm going to say private SQLCon as new SQL Ce connection. Alright, and we're going to add one property to this. We have to point to the data source. And normally in most SQL projects or other database types, you have a server installed somewhere. The beauty of SQL Server Compact is that our database is a single file that resides in our project directory. So it's really easy to point to this. So we say data source equals ComboFill dot SDF. Okay. I doubt that's case sensitive, but throw in a semicolon, close that string, and we're good to go. And that should give us a connection to our database. Now we need to create a variable for our command, and our command is what is executed when we want to run a query or an insert or something like that into our database. So I'm going to say private SQL CMD as a SQL Ce command. Okay. And now we need an adapter and a data set for SQL data. So I'm just going to say this is for SQL data, and I'm going to make these public because I want to be able to access these from other classes like our main form. Once we create an instance of this control class, because we will be relying on these quite a bit. I'm going to say SQL DA as SQL Ce data adapter, and another public variable SQL DS, and this is probably the most important one. This is where our data is going to be called from in our main application. So as a data set, and I'm going to be using parameterized queries. So just because it's a good practice, and it's more professional and helps you prevent SQL injection attacks against your databases and whatnot. Probably not a big deal on a tutorial, but it's just, like I said, it's a good practice and it's pretty easy to use them. So I'm going to use query parameters. And to do this, I'm going to create a public list called params as new, and make sure you use new here. It's important to actually initialize a new instance of the list collection. So a new list of SQL Ce parameter. Okay. So we've created a list or a collection of SQL Ce parameters called params. So every time we run a query, if we want to use filters, which are essentially, it's like variables for SQL databases. Okay, it allows you to actually use variables inside of your SQL statements, which is nice. And finally, I'm going to add a couple of variables just for query statistics, our record count and any errors or exceptions that we may encounter along the way. So I'm going to say query statistics, and the first is just going to be a public record count as an integer. That will store just a count. Sometimes it's nice to know how many records you've updated in, when you run a command against your database. You want some, stats or results. Can be very handy to make sure that your commands are running properly. And exception, because I want to capture any error messages I get when I run my queries. Alright, so now that our variables are done here, we can begin creating our query execution sub. And the nice thing about using this class is this is completely reusable code. You can just kind of drag this over and copy it over to other projects if you have other database projects you're making. It's really nice, and it also makes this sort of dynamic. It allows us to control the SQL Control class. One difference between this project and something that might be a little more professional is that generally you're not going to specify your SQL connection parameters right here. You're probably going to have a settings tab or something in your application where you can actually allow the user to define what database they want to connect to and things like that. So let's go ahead and begin creating our query execution sub. I'm going to make this sub public so I can access it from the outside. So I'm going to say public sub exec query, execute query. And I want to make it so I can pass a query string into this sub from the outside. So I'm just going to write query as a string, and I'm going to perform my queries inside of a try-catch statement to capture any errors. And if there's an error, we don't want it to crash our application, we want it to return it gracefully. So I'm going to just hit try and hit enter, and it will generate our try-catch statement. And the first thing we need to do is open a connection to our database. So I'm going to say SQLCon dot open. And I like to immediately follow that with SQLCon dot close, which is actually going to be the final. But I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. And we'll just be working in between these two commands. So the first thing we need to do is create our SQL command. So I'm going to say create SQL command, and I say SQL CMD, referencing our command variable up here. SQL CMD equals a new SQL CE command. And we're going to pass two parameters into this, the first being the query string that we provide from the outside up here, and the second parameter being a reference to our SQL connection. Piece of cake. Nice and easy. Alright, next up, if we have any parameters that we've supplied for variables in our query, we want to load those in right now, or put those parameters in our params list. So I'm going to use a nice clean little lambda expression to do this in a single line. And I'll try to explain that as I go. So I'm just going to say load parameters into SQL command. Alright. So what I'm going to do is reference my params list here, and I'm going to say params dot for each and I'm going to create a nameless sub inside of here, generating a lambda expression. Each sub x will be equal to the object inside of the list. So each item it encounters is x. So list item 1, list item 2, and so on. And then I'm going to tell it what to do for each x that it finds. I'm going to say SQL cmd.parameters, which is part of this SQL command object. We're just going to add whatever's in our list to this SQL params. And the item that I want to add to our command parameters is x from our list. So hope that makes sense. It simplifies it. We could do a for each item in params list, then go down and add these individually, but having a lambda expression reduces that to a single line of code, which makes it nice and clean. Next, we will clear our parameter list. Okay, once we've added all of our parameters to our command, we don't want to leave them up here, because then next time we go to run a query, it's going to be finding a whole bunch of parameters from our past queries and trying to add them in. It's going to crash our future queries. So we're just going to dump that list when we're done adding them to our command. So to do that, it's very simple. We just say params.clear. So that flushes our parameter list. Now we are ready to capture our data. Execute our command and fill the data set. Alright. To do this, the first thing we're going to do is create a brand new clean data set. So we'll say SQL DS equals a new, very important to use that new, data set. And once we've created that, we can create a new data adapter as well. So SQLDA equals new SQLCE data adapter. And inside of the data adapter parameters, we want to tell it what to do. This is going to cause it to execute this SQL command that we've loaded up with parameters. So we want to reference that SQL command right here. And as soon as it creates this new SQL data adapter, it automatically executes this. And then once we do that, we want to set record count, and this is kind of interesting, is going to equal the execution of our, or the filling of our data set. Okay, when we use the data adapter's fill method, say .fill, it returns a numeric value indicating the number of records that were affected. So we're going to capture that into this record count variable. And what we want to fill using our data adapter is our data set. So we're just kind of passing the data around here. Goes out to the database, grabs it through the data adapter, and then dumps it into the data set. And that's all there is to it. Now here I like to capture errors if there's a problem. What I'm going to do is just capture it to this exception string, which I will be able to reference because it's public. I can grab it from the outside. So I'm just going to say exception equals ex dot message. Alright, now in the event that there is an error, we need to make certain that the database is closed. So what happens here is if it's running through the try-catch and it's able to execute part of the query, but it encounters an error halfway, it will jump out of this try, it'll jump out of this code and go straight down to the exceptions. Okay, so it will actually bypass this closure and leave the database open. So what we need to do is, after it's done with this whole try-catch thing, we need to just make absolutely certain that the database is closed, otherwise it will hang up future queries. So we'll say if SQL connection dot state equals connection state open, saying if it's still open, then please close it. SQLCon dot close. Alright, so make sure the connection is closed. Now we just need to add one final method to this, and it will be a completely functional and usable class. We need to add a method to actually input parameters into our list here. So just to simplify it, we could access this remotely and just dump them in, but it's nicer to make things dynamic so your code's not quite so bloated and huge at the end. Having a simple class to handle that, or a simple method to handle that, keeps things clean. So I'm going to say public sub add param, and I'm going to give the parameter has to have a name, and a parameter also has to have a value. Okay, so value can be different data types, integers, strings, different database data types. So rather than actually trying to add it as a string or some other kind of data type, we're just going to use an object data type, which can essentially be anything. So value as object, and here we're going to dim a new parameter. So we create a new instance of SQL parameter. Make sure you use new SQL Ce parameter, and we're just going to dump the name parameter and the value into this new SQL parameter. So it's pretty simple. And finally, once we've generated a brand new SQL parameter, we're going to dump it into our params list. So we'll just say params dot add new param. That's all there is to it. Create a new parameter, add it to the list. So this makes it really simple to add them from the outside without having a bunch of extra code. So we should be ready to go here. Now what we need to do is actually have some data in our database to draw from. That's going to be pretty important. So what you can do is you can right click on this database and go to properties. I'm sorry, open, not properties. Open, and it should bring up your Server Explorer with your database. Combo fill, and what we have is a blank database with no tables or anything. So all I want to do is just add a table. I'm going to right click on my tables folder there and create a table. And this table I'm just going to call food. And I'm going to add a column name ID. I like to add an ID column that's going to auto increment. It's important to set this to identity increment now, because if for some reason if you forget to do that and you come back, you've made your table all up, spent a bunch of time creating your table, and you come back and realize you forgot to set an identity increment, it won't allow you to do it without dropping the table and rebuilding it all over again. So I'm going to set the data type on my ID column to integer, int, length is 4, Allow nulls is going to be no, unique, yes, primary key, yes, okay? And here's where I want to make sure this is set to be an identity field. Alright. So next up, I am going to add some columns. I want food name, and I'm just going to leave this on nvarchar and give it a length of 30 characters. Allow nulls, no, I don't want to allow nulls. Unique, the food name must be unique because I want one of each kind of food in here. Doesn't need to be a primary key. Food type is going to be my next field, and the food type can have multiple values of the same type. So I'm going to say allow nulls. I don't want any nulls here. I want each one to have a food type, but it does not need to be unique, so I'll just leave that. So that's a very simple table structure. I'm just going to keep it like that and click OK, and that will generate a brand new food table for us. Now that we've done that, we need to add some items to pull into our fields. So what I'm going to do is come back over here and right click on this table and go to show table data, and that will actually allow me to edit the table values here. So food names, let's do apple. Well, it's a fruit. Okay. Steak, that's a meat. Chicken, that's also a meat. Poultry, whatever. Banana is a fruit, and a pie for dessert, whatever. That's probably good enough for testing. So I'm going to go ahead and save my project here as ComboFill. Hit save. And now I have some goodies in my database to play with. So I'm going to click on my toolbox here, and I'm going to grab a couple of labels so we know what we're putting where. This one's just going to be food. I'm clicking on my label and changing the text property here in the properties. And you should be able to right click on that, copy, and paste another one, or Control V, Control C, and Control V to copy and paste those. And this one will be food type. Okay. And I did rename that, right? Okay. So, let's go ahead and double click on our form to get into our form code. Now we're ready to start coding our main form. First thing we need to do is reference our lovely new SQL Control class. So I'm going to create a private variable called SQL to very easily manage all of my SQL queries and connections. So I will do SQL as a new, very important, SQL Control, and it should find your class and reference it, and that's all there is to it. Very easy. So now what we need is a sub to manage our, sorry about that, I have a phone call. Going to jump down and create our method for populating our ComboBox. Okay, so I'm going to say private sub get foods. I don't need any parameters here. And I'm going to query the foods table. Now, generally, if I wanted any filters on my query, I would add some of our SQL parameters, but I do not need that since this is sort of a generic. I want to grab everything from my foods table into my combo box. I want to grab all of the food names. So this is going to be very simple. I'm just going to say SQL.execute query, and here is where I'm going to put in my query string. You do need to be familiar with SQL. It's just using SQL Compact Edition is virtually identical to using SQL Server, with the exception that it's lacking a few of the more advanced commands. Other than that, it's very similar. I'm just going to say select food name from food. Okay, that's all there is to it. We've generated a SQL query. So if we wanted to test this from the get-go, we could do message box and grab SQL. Once we launch that query, if you remember back here, it sets the record count. So if we have any foods in our table, then they should be drawn in here. So I'll say message box SQL.record count. I want to know how many it finds, if any. And we need to actually fire this, so I'm just going to put it in my form load event here. Just going to say get foods, run it, and look at that, found 5 fruits in there. If you got an error when you did that, instead what you could do is capture the exception, to find out what it was, or if you got 0 records. Now ours is working fine, but what if we just threw in an error for the fun of it? I'm going to try selecting food name from a foods table, which we know is incorrect. Oh, look at that. It captured an error. The specified table does not exist, foods. So it's a good way to capture your errors. I fix that. And now that we are successfully running queries of our database, we can now capture some of those records. So what I'm going to do is say if records are found, add them to the combo box. Alright. So what we want to do is say if SQL.records record count is greater than 0. So if we do find records, then for each R as a data row in SQL.SQLDS or data set tables, we always grab the first table in the list that it finds, which is always 0. .rows. Okay, so to go over this again, we are probing our tables here, the rows of our tables, for each row that it finds in this list of rows, this collection of database rows. We want to return the value of that to our combo box. So I'm going to say cbx food.items.add, and the value that we want to add to our combo box is going to be R, being the data row that's returned, and we have to reference the correct column from that row of data, because we have 3 columns: the ID, the food name, and the food type. So we want specifically the one that we pulled in our query. So I'm going to say food name in quotes, and that tells it which column to grab. So we're going to capture all of our food names into our combo box. And then once it's done, we want to set the first, unless you don't want it to automatically select one of the items, leave it blank as you see it here. You don't have to do that. If you actually want it, once it finds items, if you want it to automatically put a value in here, you just set the ComboBox to the first record that it finds. Okay, so we're going to say cbx.food, oops, cbx.food.selectedIndex equals 0. That just sets it to the very first item that exists, and it changes the value, the text value and whatnot, to whatever item is there. Selects it. Okay. And sorry, I ran out of time there. Down here we can say else if SQL.exception is not empty, then report errors. Message box SQL.exception. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this guy and see what happens. I'm just going to hit play, and look at that. Looks like it's going through our database and filling our combo box. Now, if you do this multiple times, your combo box is probably not going to clear out. So, if I ran this get food several times, it's probably going to start duplicating the items in the combo box because it won't remove them. If you wanted to, you could probably throw something, up in here. Something like clear combo box. Do something like cbxfood.items.clear. I think that would kind of purge it for us. If we had a button, we could sort of test that, but main thing is I wanted to show you how to draw data into this combo box from your database. Next up, what if we want to have some sort of action when we select banana? Okay, what if we wanted it to query the database again and find out what the food type was? Well, we can certainly do that. What we're going to do is create a second sub down here to fetch the food type. So creating a new method here called private sub get food type. Okay, and for this command, the food type that I want to get is going to be based upon the food that is selected in the database. So whatever food I select should have a food type associated with it. So I'm going to say food as string. Okay, and that's going to essentially be my query filter. So here we are going to actually use our search parameters to pass this in as a variable in our SQL query. So I'm going to say add a search parameter. And to do this is quite simple, because we added this add parameters sub to our SQL Control class. All we have to do is say SQL.addParam, and we need to specify the name of our parameter, which is usually done, it's a string, so we have to open quotes here, and usually use an @ sign, and then give it give our SQL variable a name. In this case, it will be food. And then hit comma, and now we need to know the value that we need to pass to our database through this variable. And in this case, it's just going to be the food string that we have there. So very simple to add parameters now to our queries. And they're also pretty simple to use. So now that we have that, all we have to do is run the query. Okay. SQL.execute query, and we're going to build a query string here. I'm going to say select. Food type is what we want to return here from our food table, where so for our filter, say where the food name is equal to our food parameter, okay, our food variable. So this should match. What we're going to do is pass this into here, and it's going to load it into this variable, and we are going to call that variable inside of our string right here. So it actually, normally if we're not using parameters, what we might have to do is have do something like this, where the food name equals, and then we have to break our string, concatenate on the ComboBox and the text from the ComboBox, okay? And then we'd have to close our string, make sure we put our single quotes in there on each side, and you know, it's kind of a pain, and it also is less secure because people can use SQL injection attacks against your database if they're given a field to type in and execute those queries. So much better to use SQL parameters. Alright, so that's fairly simple, and then we'll say if our food is found, then send the food type to our text box, okay? So we're going to say if we find some food records here, let's say if SQL.recordCount is greater than 0, then we are going to set our txt, that's our text box, food type, dot text to equal, and this is where, you know, this is going to be a load of information here. So SQL dot our SQL data set, SQLDS dot the first table it finds being 0, and then the first row it finds, if for some reason our, you know, I set it so in our database the food name is unique, so it will always only return a single food value here, okay? It should always only return one record. However, if for some reason you had more than one food of the same name, you know, had two different types, or you had a duplicate record for some reason, if we just grab row 0, it's going to force it to grab the very first record that it finds and report that item. And the item that we want is our food type. So just like we used up here is a lot easier because we just cycled through the records and grabbed all of this text into this, you know, kind of wrapped it all into this R, which is a row. In this case, we're calling the table, the row in the table, and then the item in the row. So item is going to be food type. Okay. So just to kind of go over this again, if we have more than 0 records, if it finds data, then set our text box to be equal to the data that it found, the food type that it found, okay? So we're not actually firing that just yet. Now we need to actually cause it to execute this food type. And what we'll do is make this a nice dynamic query. So we're going to double click on our ComboBox, and that's going to generate a text index, selected index change event, okay? And from here, meaning every time we click our drop-down list and select an item, it's going to run this new query, okay? Creates a dynamic query. It's pretty awesome. So to do this is very simple. We'll just say get food type, calling upon the sub that we just created here, which is, you know, really only 3 lines of code, very simple. And we need to know what kind of food, because we want this to be dynamic, we don't just want to say, you know, apple or something like that. We want it to be whatever is in the combo box when we change our selection. So every time we select a new item in our combo box, so we'll say cbx food dot text, and that will show the selected item, the text. So what we're going to do is when we select an item, it's going to pass that text into this get food, and that text is going to become a parameter, and that parameter will be a variable to filter our query by. See how that kind of just rolls down nice and clean? So if we run this guy, look at that. It already, because what happened is when we first started, it ran this get foods, and at the end of get foods we are changing the selected index, and because it sees that as a selected index change event, and it automatically fires as soon as the application starts. And so it pulls apple, queries the database for our food types, loads the list, and then as soon as that index changes, it runs another query against the database, grabbing the food type associated with that. So if we select banana, that's also a fruit. If we select pie, it's a dessert. If we select chicken, it's a meat. So every time we do this, we're running a new query against the database and just grabbing the associated data using this as our filter. Pretty awesome stuff. So I hope that this database tutorial has been helpful to you, and keep in mind, like I said earlier, you know, I know we're using SQL here, SQL CE specifically, not even SQL Server, but this can be used exactly in the same way with SQL Server or with you know, any other database type that we're connecting to. So I hope this helps out. You know, please leave your comments and you know, and your thumbs up if you liked it. I appreciate that. I wish you all well. Thank you. Bye-bye.